Well, g'day folks, welcome to week 17 here on our Chronological Bible-in-a-Year reading challenge. This week our narrative is going to come from the Book of Chronicles. It's going to repeat much of what we've already read in the Book of Samuel, but from a different historical vantage point. And we're also going to be continuing to read the Book of Psalms. I think we have 15 lined up this week, so I'm sure you're going to enjoy that as well. Till then, sit back, relax, and enjoy today's tutorial. Well, good day everyone. Welcome to week 17, 1/3 of the way through our chronological Bible reading plan, reading through the Bible in the year. That's right, we're 1/3 of the way through. So well done. I trust you enjoyed last week's readings. 25 Psalms is what we read, and we finished up in 2 Samuel 4 with David as king just over Judah, his tribe, and the house of Saul sort of coming to terms with the fact that they are no longer in charge. This week we're going to take a little break from Samuel and head over to the Book of Chronicles. I explained a few weeks ago that Chronicles, like Samuel, was originally written as one book, although we've split it into two just so they could, basically in the old days, they could handle the size of the scrolls. I think that's basically as simple as it was when they put the Bible into Greek. They split some of the bigger books, and that's really as spiritual as it gets. All right, so we're reading the first 10 chapters of 1 Chronicles this week. Now, Chronicles, the reason we're reading it now is because the stories we're going to be reading in Chronicles parallel, or maybe not parallel, they repeat, no, not repeat. Let's say that. They repeat the stories in Samuel, but with quite a different feel to them, all right? And there's a number of reasons for that. Do you remember when we were reading the Torah, the books of Moses, and we came to the last one, Deuteronomy? A lot of it was repeated. A lot of it was retelling the stories that we already read in Exodus and Numbers. And the reason for that was Moses was writing 40 years after those events. So it's kind of like when you read Exodus and Numbers, you were reading the story as it happens. You know, it had that kind of feel to it. And then 40 years later, he repeats those stories to the next generation. Well, Chronicles is a little bit like that. When we read Samuel, we're kind of reading the story of King Saul and David as it happens and as it unfolds. But Chronicles, get this, was written about 600 to 700 years. Not just 40 like Deuteronomy, no, 6 or 7 centuries after the events had taken place. In fact, the Hebrew Bible, okay, the Tanakh is the official term, has Chronicles as their very last book. Not Malachi. Chronicles was written after Malachi prophesied in the era of the rebuilt temple. Okay, it was written at least 200 years after the temple was rebuilt in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. So it's one of the last written books, 600 to 700 years after the fact. And the reason it was written, and this is one of the reasons it has quite a different feel to Samuel, is because it looks back over Israel's history. It chronicles, okay, their history from from Adam all the way through to King David, and then on into the Restoration era, which we'll get to later. And then the focus of Chronicles is all about King David and his kingly line. And the reason for that is, it is written with all the messianic hopes that the prophets give, we'll get to in a few months' time, where they speak of another king coming who's going to be just like David. Another king in the line of David that will rule as he did. So while it shares much of the history of the Samuel story, the Book of Chronicles omits all of the bad stuff. Okay, it omits all of the challenging stuff that David went through with King Saul. You won't read any of that this week. It omits a lot of the bad mistakes that David made and a lot of the issues that his sons gave him. And it's not because Chronicles wants to sweep those things under the carpet hundreds of years later. No, of course not. Everyone already has the Book of Samuel by now. Okay. The reason that it's written that way is because it is painted as a book of prophetic hope, pointing forward to the day where a new king of Israel will come who's just like the awesome king we had when we had David. All right? So as we read Chronicles, it's going to be same, but different. A little bit like reading Deuteronomy, looking back over the future past, or a little bit like reading the Gospels. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John all tell kinda the same stories, but they all have their different bent to it. And so that's why we're reading Chronicles now and taking a quick break from the book of Samuel. But don't worry, we're going to be getting back to Samuel very quick. As I said the other week, we're going to be spending basically 2 months of our readings all on David, Samuel, Chronicles and Psalms, and going back and forth in those books reading all about David. Okay, so this week you're going to be reading the first 10 chapters of Chronicles. Let me give you a warning. They are very boring, because 9 of those 10 chapters is nothing but names. You are going to be reading hundreds and hundreds of names, and some of you I know skimming through those names. Some of them you'll recognize because basically they're all genealogies. And while it may be boring to you or me, it was really important to the chronicler as he is drawing the line from Adam through to Abraham, through to David and his sons, and pointing a picture of the prophetic king who was on his way. So because the first 10 chapters of Chronicles are a bit boring, you're probably going to finish that really quick, all right? Just don't feel bad about it. You're probably going to flick through those names kind of quick and get that kind of done because it is a bit boring. If you do that, then please let me urge you. Spend your time this week in the readings of Psalms. Don't read them fast, all right? Be devotional with the Psalms this week. The 3 R's: read, reflect, and then respond. Because there are some beautiful, beautiful words in these Psalms that we're going to be reading this week. Here's a couple of things I want you to pay attention to. The first is the various audiences that Psalms have. Psalm 45, you read this week, is actually a song directed at King David. It wasn't sung for him, it was sung to him, which is really strange because it calls him in that psalm the most excellent of men. And then a few verses later says, "O God," to David, which sounds a little bit heretical, right? Until you get to the book of Hebrews in the New Testament, where it quotes this psalm being written to King David and said that was actually written to Jesus, the one who is God and man. Interesting. Psalm 49 is a song that's directed at all humanity, not to King David, but to all humans. And it's sort of, the psalmist pleads with them to not put their trust in wealth, because no matter how much wealth you have, it can never buy you eternal life. In fact, read Psalm 49 with the afterlife in mind, because again, Psalm 49 builds our theology on what the afterlife looks like, both for the righteous and the unrighteous. Some of the psalms, of course, are directed at God himself, and one of them this week is actually directed to a city. It's directed to Zion, to Jerusalem. You'll also notice this week that the Psalms of Asaph, and we'll be reading at least 3 of them this week, contain a whole stack of history from Israel's past that you and I have already read. So don't read that quickly, all right? Let those songs remind you of the stories that you read, because that's why cultures write songs. That's why we have the Psalms. You know, God's people may have had the Torah, they may have had the books of Moses, they may have had oral tradition at this stage in their history, but hardly any of them could read. So what they did, they made up songs of history. They made up psalms so they could teach one another. Remember, Moses said, "Teach your children the things I'm telling you today." Well, the psalmists do that in a wonderful way in song. They remind God's people of their history through song. So I want you to pay attention to that this week. Which also reminds us that psalms are not just songs of worship and praise, as important as that is. And part of your responding to God this week as you read, I'm sure, will be worshiping him and praising him with the very truths you've written. But the psalms, as we read these next couple of months, are not just songs of praise. They contain profound prophecies, many of them about Jesus, and probably already you've underlined passages that you know are speaking of Jesus. They contain profound prophecies. They contain detailed history. They contain personal reflections, emotional expressions, as well as encouragements, exhortations, rebukes, instructions, and godly wisdoms. There is far more to the Psalms than simple choruses that the Christian church might have sung over history. They are full of many, many good things. So I'm saying all that to say, get through the first chapters of Chronicles this week. If you're bored with it, Don't feel bad. I understand. But really spend your time in those 15 Psalms this week. I'm sure you'll get a lot out of them. All right. Bless you guys heaps. Enjoy this week. Yeah. And I'll see you on the other side. I think we're going to be back in Samuel and then hopping over to Chronicles again. Anyway, enjoy. Bye.
That's it for today's lesson. I really hope you enjoy your readings this week. Remember, allow yourself time to read as much as you can in one sitting. Don't get lost in the detail. Just keep going and watch the Bible's big story unfold before you. Remember also to hit me up on our social media channels or website, and I'll see you next time.